Hello and welcome back to my blog. We're on to part 4 of Sophisms of the Protectionists. And this is part 1, chapter 1, Abundance, Scarcity. Which is the best for man or for society, abundance or scarcity? How, it may be exclaimed, can such a question be asked? Has it ever been pretended? Is it possible to maintain that scarcity can be the basis of a man's happiness? Yes, this has been maintained, this is daily maintained, and I do not hesitate to say that the scarcity theory is by far the most popular of the day. It furnishes the subject of discussions in conversations, journals, books, courts of justice, and extraordinary as it may appear, it is certain that political economy will have fulfilled its task and its practical mission when it shall have rendered common and irrefutable the simple proposition that in abundance consist man's riches. Do we not hear it said every day? Foreign nations are inundating us with their productions. Then we fear abundance. Has not Mr. de St. Cricq said, production is superabundant? Then he fears abundance. Do we not see workmen destroying and breaking machinery? They are frightened by the excess of production. In other words, they fear abundance. Has not Mr. Bogod said, let bread be dear and the agriculturist will be rich? Now bread can only be dear because it is scarce. Then Mr. Bogod lauded scarcity. Has not Mr. Dargo produced the fruitfulness of the sugar culture as an argument against it? Has he not said, the beet cannot have a permanent and extended cultivation because a few acres given up to it in each department would furnish sufficient for the consumption of all France? Then, in his opinion, good consists in sterility and scarcity, evil in fertility and abundance. La Presse, Le Commerce, and the majority of our journals are every day publishing articles whose aim is to prove to the chambers and to government that a wise policy should seek to raise prices by tariffs. And do we not daily see these powers obeying these injunctions of the press? Now, tariffs can only raise prices by diminishing the quantity of goods offered for sale. Then here we see newspapers, the legislature, the ministry, all guided by the scarcity theory. And I was correct in my statement that this theory is by far the most popular. How then has it happened that in the eyes at once of laborers, editors, and statesmen, abundance should appear alarming and scarcity advantageous? It is my intention to endeavor to show the origin of this delusion. A man becomes rich in proportion to the profitableness of his labor, that is to say, in proportion as he sells his production at a high price. The price of his productions is high in proportion to their scarcity. It is plain, then, that as far as regards him at least, scarcity enriches him. Applying successively this mode of reasoning to each class of laborers individually, the scarcity theory is deduced from it. To put this theory into practice, and in order to favor each class of labor, an artificial scarcity is forced in every kind of production by prohibition, restriction, suppression of machinery, and other analogous measures. In the same manner, it is observed that when an article is abundant, it brings a small price. The gains of the producer are, of course, less. If this is the case with all produce, all producers are then poor. Abundance then ruins society. And as any strong conviction will always seek to force itself into practice, we see in many countries the laws aiming to prevent abundance. This sophism, stated in a general form, would produce but a slight impression, but when applied to any particular order of facts, to any particular article of industry, to any one class of labor, it is extremely specious, because it is a syllogism which is not false, but incomplete. And what is true in a syllogism always necessarily presents itself to the mind, while the incomplete, which is a negative quality, an unknown value, is easily forgotten in the calculation. Man produces in order to consume. He is at once producer and consumer. The argument given above considers him only under the first point of view. Let us look at him in the second character, and the conclusion will be different. We may say, the consumer is rich in proportion as he buys at a low price. He buys at a low price in proportion to the abundance of the article in demand. Abundance then enriches him. This reasoning, extended to all consumers, must lead to the theory of abundance. It is the imperfectly understood notion of exchange of produce which leads to these fallacies. If we consult our individual interest, we perceive immediately that it is double. As sellers, we are interested in high prices, consequently in scarcity. As buyers, our advantage is in cheapness, or what is the same thing, abundance. It is impossible, then, to found a proper system of reasoning upon either the one or the other of these separate interests before determining which of the two coincides and identifies itself with the general and permanent interests of mankind. If man were a solitary animal, working exclusively for himself, consuming the fruit of his own personal labor, if, in a word, he did not exchange his produce, the theory of scarcity could never have introduced itself into the world. It would be too strikingly evident that abundance, whencesoever derived, is advantageous to him, whether this abundance might be the result of his own labor, of ingenious tools, or of powerful machinery, whether due to the fertility of the soil, to the liberality of nature, or to an inundation of foreign goods such as the sea, bringing from distant regions, might cast upon his shores. Never would the solitary man have dreamed, in order to encourage his own labor, of destroying his instruments for facilitating his work, of neutralizing the fertility of the soil, or of casting back into the sea the produce of its bounty. He would understand that his labor was a means, not an end, and that it would be absurd to reject the object in order to encourage the means. He would understand that if he has required 2 hours per day to supply his necessities, anything which spares him an hour of this labor, leaving the result the same, gives him this hour to dispose of as he pleases in adding to his comforts. In a word, he would understand that every step in the saving of labor is a step in the improvement of his condition. But traffic clouds our vision in the contemplation of this simple truth. In a state of society with the division of labor to which it leads, the production and consumption of an article no longer belong to the same individual. Each now looks upon his labor not as a means, but as an end. The exchange of produce creates with regard to each object two separate interests, that of the producer and that of the consumer, and these two interests are always directly opposed to each other. It is essential to analyze and study the nature of each. Let us then suppose a producer of whatever kind. What is his immediate interest? It consists in two things. First, that the smallest possible number of individuals should devote themselves to the business which he follows, and secondly, that the greatest possible number should seek the articles of his produce. In the more succinct terms of political economy, the supply should be small, the demand large, or yet in other words, limited competition, unlimited consumption. What on the other side is the immediate interest of the consumer, that the supply should be large, the demand small. As these two interests are immediately opposed to each other, it follows that if one coincides with the general interest of society, the other must be adverse to it. Which then, if either, should legislation favor as contributing most to the good of the community? To determine this question, it suffices to inquire in which the secret desires of the majority of men would be accomplished. Inasmuch as we are producers, it must be confessed that we have each of us antisocial desires. Are we vine growers? It would not distress us were the frost to nip all the vines in the world except our own. This is the scarcity theory. Are we iron workers? We would desire, whatever might be the public need, that the market should offer no iron but our own. And precisely for the reason that this need, painfully felt and imperfectly supplied, causes us to receive a high price for our iron. Again, here is the theory of scarcity. Are we agriculturists? We say with Mr. Bogod, let bread be dear, that is to say scarce, and our business goes well. Again, the theory of scarcity.